come sit down for a second and allow a random person on the internet to give you dating advice because I know you're bored. That's why you clicked on this video. I've been kind of going through a little bit of a dilemma, in the dating scene. Um so I've it's been a while since I've been in a relationship, and things ended all right. It's not the worst that a relationship has ended, but um, you know, I wouldn't I would be lying if I said that there was a little bit of guilt that I still had, because I was the one that broke up with this person, and the reasons it was really hard for me to do so because this relationship was 3 years in the making, and I'll never forget the like the month or so like after the breakup, because it's weird like not seeing someone anymore after you spent time with them for 3 years. And so yeah, I mean the way that things ended, I still have like a little bit of guilt, and I it's not that I have any sort of attachment to this person, right? I think the thing is I just feel guilty because of the way that I kind of left this person in a certain situation. To because this person had undealt with family trauma and like family issues and stuff like that. There was a very 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 heavy reliance on me and our relationship to make this person feel good. And whenever there were moments when like the mask for her kind of slipped, because as much as she said that she wasn't going to let that affect the relationship, and let there be a heavy reliance on me to make her feel good. Ultimately, whenever there were instances where I wasn't able to live up to those expectations, she it would make her feel upset towards me, and then it's a whole thing, right? But other God, other than that, man, like this person was a really great person. Someone that I felt like I could have seen myself with. But if you don't, I just believe I'm a believer that like if you can't love yourself, then there's no. I don't think there's a way that you could properly love another person. And because that builds a bunch of like insecurities and stuff, and then it's just a whole thing. I've trust me, I've gone through that. And recently I've tried to get back in the scene a little bit, the dating scene, and it's been tough because for instance, like I was talking to this one girl, and you know I took her like on a date and stuff, and then after the date, I realized that she was moving, like 40 minutes away, because I live in a metroplex, and that there's little towns. You have the main town, and then you have like the other towns, the main city, and then the other little towns sprinkled around. And from my house to where she moved to, it would have been 40 minutes, and then with my ex, she lived near the same part, or near the same amount of time away from me as this other person. And I think, I knew that I didn't want to go through that again. So now, like, I already know kind of based off of my last relationship, like what I want, like what I want in a person, what I don't want in a person. And it kind of led me to like really see if I could stand firm on, these things that I know that I wanted. And don't get me wrong, like this recent little person that I was talking to or whatever, don't get me wrong, like great gal, but there, I think like the main issue was like the distance and stuff. And because I was talking with my friends, right, I was like, she's great and all, but with my last relationship, the drive, the driving aspect was like we weren't able to see each other every day or all the time, or as much as we would have liked to. We could only see each other like on a weekend or something like that. And I think with that, with my last relationship, it caused like problems because we weren't able to see each other all the time. And, you know, sorry. And, whenever we would try to make time for each other, sometimes the plans would fall through because of like schedules and stuff like that. And, there would be it would be that thing where she would get like the other person would like get upset at me, and it was out of my control, and then that would cause the whole thing. And so, the point that I'm trying to get to is that like I am trying to be a little bit more picky with, how or with who I see myself with. Like I said with this last person that I was talking to, how she also lived far, like was I going to was that going to be like a compromise even though I already established like what I wanted in a relationship? And it then led me to think like if I compromised, something like a drive or whatever, then that would probably lead me to compromise with other things that I think would have been I guess like an issue for me. And I am now in a place in my life where I have learned to stand firm on what I truly want and to go after things that I just want. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but you know, and like with that, I don't want to be in a place where I just compromise with like small things because I feel like that would lead me to just learn to compromise with like bigger things that I see that I would deem in like an issue. I just it's honestly kind of hard too because like with this last person that I talked to, it was like she was really pretty, you know, not kind of more quiet natured, and just a great person all around. But I think like because for someone, some people think that it's just a drive. It's not just a drive. Like that will determine like how often you get to see this person, and how much you will be around them. And I did it for 3 years. I wasn't able to see this. I wasn't able to see my ex like as much as I would have liked to because I get off of work at 5 or whatever, and then get ready, and then by the time I drive and get to her house, it'll be like maybe 6:30 or 7, and then I'm not gonna want to stay out late, and it's just like a bunch of different factors that over time just build up, and I didn't want to do that again. And I was just really having to put my foot down with certain things, and I just didn't want to do that again. I didn't want to just compromise on things that I kind of would just go against. I don't know if that really makes any sense. But cuz like now cuz I told myself like now for whoever I talk to or whatever, like I want them to live near me. I want them to have like these certain qualities. I want them to not have these certain qualities. And I can't start compromising on just like the small things because that will then lead me to just compromise with like whatever. And so now with relationships, and I know what I want now, and so I shouldn't just be so quick to just like let these like small things go because over time they will build up, and it'll sometimes it just causes issues. So dating in like a metroplex can be kind of hard, honestly, because or honestly, I mean it shouldn't be that hard, but I don't know. It's like the more picky I become, like the harder it just is because there's not people out there that like once you get to know them on a deeper level, there will probably be qualities that come up, and then I'll just be like, oh, like I don't really like that. And so now I will be at a standstill. Like, should I just compromise and try and see if I can deal with this, or should I just stop it right now and then let them know like, hey, this isn't gonna work work out. Because you can, I've also been in the position like where I try to communicate and we try to work it out, but ultimately it's up to the other party to see if they were willing to do that change. And same with me too. It's not just this other person, with me as well. Like if I'm talking to this person and we're talking for like several months or whatever, and then we end up dating, and then because I think like after the dating, like after I ask this person to be my girlfriend, right, and we're in a relationship, then these certain qualities that come up within us, that we might not like, there are some, like we'll just have to communicate with that and see if we can communicate through it and work on ourselves and whatnot. But in the talking stage, it's a lot easier to just be more pick and choose, because you're not committed in a relationship yet. And so it's just like a bunch of different things that like now, because with this other, like this was she was my very first serious relationship, and it lasted for 3 years. And I've learned so much about like myself and what I like, how I am in a relationship, and the things that I do and the things that I should get better at. And so now I feel like this is like a weird way of putting it, but I have like more experience for like a future relationship. And so I just think that now, like I can't, especially like during a talking stage, like I can't begin to just compromise with like these small things, because eventually they will lead to like a much bigger deal, and it'll just be something that it'll become a much bigger deal, and then it'll just be something that I'll just have to deal with in the future. And so I think that if you are a young person like me, and you find it kind of hard to date, I for me, like personally, a message to you is just don't compromise. Really try and find someone that checks off a lot of the uh, points on your list, because you rather that than later down the road when you're actually in a committed relationship that a bunch of these things start popping up and you're having to just deal with them constantly. you know that was true for me, especially like towards the end of my last relationship. And unfortunately, ultimately it did not work out, as you can tell. um but one thing that I am glad is like, I didn't get married or anything like that. So I think I will say, I for sure tried. I tried to help this person out. I tried to be the best boyfriend that I could have been. And I think ultimately there was just an over reliance on me, and this relationship was put on just like such a huge pedestal, and it was, I don't know, it was put on a huge pedestal. And like, and it had like, there was a heavy amount of, more, it was more on the unhealthy side of attachment issues. And because obviously there's a healthy attachment and then unhealthy attachment, and unfortunately it was not the latter. So take it from a stranger on the internet, dude. Like, if you please, like, just don't compromise the things that you would like in your ideal, like in an ideal person, because that's just less things that you have to deal with. And in the future it'll just be a lot easier for you to just deal with the more like minuscule things than rather you just compromising, and then y'all are in a committed relationship, and then you just have all these sorts of things that you don't really like about this person. I don't know, it's just such it's just an issue. It'll just be a huge issue. So, but that's gonna be it for me today, guys. Please like and sub, and I will see y'all in the next video. Peace.